That's one brave dwarf mongoose.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Imagine bringing in an animal to solve a problem and indirectly creating a menace that wipes out every single endangered species. From trying to wipe out the pit viper population to creating a monster that threatened to destroy the ecosystem. This is the story of how Japan brought snake killers to the island. And 25 years later, everyone was shocked. But first, we must explore how a solution became a problem. Between 81,000 and 138 people die from snake bites every year. Multiply these numbers by 3, and you'll get the number of permanent disabilities caused by snake bites annually. The specific number of snakebite victims might be unknown. However, millions of cases have been recorded across the globe. According to the World Health Organization, an estimated 5.4 million people are bitten every year. Farm workers, passers-by, and children remain the main target, especially the children, who suffer much pain compared to adults because of their smaller body structure. This was especially true in Japan back in the late 1970s, when the nation faced an arch-enemy known as the venomous habu pit viper. Habu is a species of pit viper, endemic to the Ryukyu Islands from Japan. This pit viper is the largest of its caliber, built with a slender body and a large head. It has a length of between 4 to 5 feet, growing to a maximum height of 7.9 feet. The species is terrestrial and mostly nocturnal. It often enters homes and other structures in search of prey to feed on. The habu pit viper strikes quickly and has a long reach. Its venom is also highly toxic, containing dangerous compounds like cytotoxin and hemorrhagic components. A bite from this species triggers varying reactions in the victim: nausea, vomiting, hypotension, and possibly death. In some cases, victims even suffer permanent disability as a result of the snake bite. For a very long time, these snakes caused a serious problem in Japan, especially in rural areas. In 1980 alone, about 400 people were victims of this snake bite, and unfortunately, many of them could not survive it. For the survival of the locals, and knowing the kind of tragedy the habu viper could cause if not taken care of, the Japanese government resolved to a very strange solution, which involved fighting nature with nature.
It's not a happy snake. He is, isn't he? Jesus, look at the length of him. Oh my God.
Amami Oshima is located in the East China Sea between Kyushu and Okinawa. Its climate is similar to balmy Okinawa's, and its white beaches, beautiful coral reefs, and crystal-clear sea make it one of the most popular snorkeling and scuba diving retreats in Japan. Accessible by plane from many major cities in Japan and by ferry from Kagoshima, most of Amami Oshima consists of hilly forest regions. They are home to scores of endemic animals, believed to be the descendants of animals that migrated when the Nansei Islands were connected to the continent. The Amami rabbit, Lidith's jay, and Otten frog are among 29 reported endemic species on Amami Oshima Island. Venomous pit vipers also live here and have served as gatekeepers that prevent intruders from entering the forest. But there was a problem. Bites from habu snakes are very serious and place the victims in danger of death. For a very long time, there were no antidotes, so people kept dying. Even after one was finally developed, it was difficult to access since it was in liquid form. This meant that it could only be stored in a place with a constant electricity supply and proper storage facilities. However, most snake bites occur in rural areas, which makes it impossible for them to access the antidotes due to lack of electricity supply. Creating a new antidote seemed challenging, so Japan came up with what seemed to be their best option at that time: biological control. The idea was to use one species to control another. So what better way to combat pit vipers than to bring in an animal that eats snakes and is immune to their venom? What better animal could fit this description than the mongoose? Back in the late 1970s, 30 of these venom-resistant predators were transported to Amami Oshima Island, a United Nations educational, scientific and cultural organization World Heritage Site. The goal was to keep down the population of the deadly and dangerous venomous pit viper, habu. Mongoose, known for their audacious attacks on highly venomous snakes, seemed like the best approach for this kind of situation. These creatures are short-legged carnivores with pointed noses, small ears, and long tails. Their claws do not retract, and in most species, there are 5 toes on each foot. They live in burrows and feed on small mammals, birds, reptiles, eggs, and occasionally fruit when they're in the mood. A number of mongooses, especially those of the genus Herpestes, attack and kill venomous snakes. They depend on speed and agility, darting at the head of the snake and crushing the skull with a powerful bite. But what happens when they get bitten by the snake? That's where their defense mechanism comes in. You see, mongooses possess a glycoprotein that binds to proteins in snake venom, which then deactivates the venom and renders it harmless to their body system. But even though the Japanese government had noble intentions, sometimes when you tamper with nature, you get some unintended consequences. The mongoose were meant to prey on the venomous pit viper. This was the initial plan for introducing them to the island. But something went wrong. There was an overlap in the lifestyle of these two animals. The snakes were mostly active at night, which doesn't align with the time mongooses are active. Because of this, they rarely met the snakes and couldn't prey on them as planned. Instead of feeding on the snakes, the mongooses turned their ravenous appetites to local Amami rabbits, drastically reducing their numbers. The problem is that these rabbits only live on Amami Oshima and one other island, and they're listed as endangered on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List. The only other problem is mongooses reproduce very fast and very quickly. Their population quickly exploded to around 10,000 by the year 2000, and the whole situation got out of hand. The government declared the island mongoose-free recently, almost 25 years after the start of that program, and nearly 50 since the ill-fated initiative began. Since they couldn't just let the mongoose population roam free, the Japanese authorities began a program of eradication. Since the year 2000, specially trained sniffer dogs and mongoose hunters have been rounding up these beasts. As of today, over 32,000 of them have been caught. Approximately 20,000 traps were set up on the island in the fiscal year 2022. It worked so well that not a single sign of a mongoose has been detected by motion-sensing cameras in 472 locations or by search dogs. Sightings were reported by residents in 6 cases, but in each case, the animal's presence could not be confirmed. But while the mongoose situation was finally resolved, what about the main problem that brought the mongoose here in the first place? Well, here's how the main problem got solved. Since the mongoose plan didn't play out as expected, the Japanese government had to go back to the drawing board. Scientists were locked in, searching for the antidotes that would safeguard the people of the island. A collaborative team of scientists from different research institutes and universities across Japan came together and mapped the entire genome of the Okinawan habu, including the genes involved in venom production. Professor Nori Sato and his team of researchers from Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology Graduate University, OIST, were a part of the study, which was published in scientific reports. Snake venom initially has attracted the attention of many scientists worldwide because of its tremendous potential in the creation of new drugs. The findings from this study might help improve efforts to identify novel therapies for treating ailments such as cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and many others. For the sake of the study, the researchers caught Okinawan habus from the wild using a long metal pole with a hook at one end and collected venom, blood, and tissue samples from them. Then, using the cutting-edge DNA sequencing facilities at OIST, the researchers identified nearly 60 genes from 18 different gene families that helped this critter make its venom. About 50 people, especially people who work on the farm tending crops in fields and orchards, are reportedly bitten by habus every year in Okinawa alone. The venom of the Okinawan habu is hemotoxic, endangering the blood cells and tissues. Even though antidotes are now available, snake bites can still cause severe pain and permanent tissue damage in humans. The scientists hope the results of this study will help to develop more effective antidotes and treatments for habu bites. As Professor Sato puts it, the findings of this study are very important, especially to the people of Okinawa and the surrounding islands where the Okinawan habu is found. But while the Okinawa situation went out of hand, it wasn't the first time countries would try to fight nature with nature, invasive species, in other countries through biological control. Japan was not the only country that suffered from an invasive species. As a matter of fact, the list may actually be longer than you might believe. A good example is Australia. Everywhere around the world, Australia is known for many things. There are tons of tropical beaches, marine reserves, Aboriginal culture, cute koalas, rolling wine country, and lush rainforests. From Queensland's sultry north, the dwelling of the Great Barrier Reef, to Sydney's iconic architecture and Melbourne's buzzy independent neighbourhoods, Australia is one of the most diverse and fascinating countries on the planet. However, the sugarcane plantation owners have one arch-enemy: cane beetles. Cane beetles are a native Australian beetle and a pest of sugarcane. The adult beetles consume the leaves of sugarcane, but greater damage is done by their larvae, which dig deep underground and eat the roots of the sugarcane. Obviously, this either killed or stifled the growth of the plant. Seeing the apparent success of the cane toad in destroying the population of beetles in Puerto Rico, as well as the fruitful introductions into Hawaii and the Philippines, the sugarcane plantation farmers sought for the help of the government to rescue them from the pest. As a result of this, in the year 1935, the government released about 2,400 cane toads into North Queensland to help control cane beetles. Because they had no natural predators in Australia, cane toads ate almost anything and have since caused many hazards to the native species of the land. Since cane toads reproduce easily, they spread quickly and widely. Within a short period, they were numbering into millions and are currently still expanding an area covering thousands of square miles in northeastern Australia. However, the toad was generally unsuccessful in minimizing the targeted grey-backed cane beetles. This was because the sugarcane fields did not provide sufficient shelter for the predators during the day, and the beetles stayed at the top of the sugarcane trunk most of the time. Cane toads are not good climbers, so they can't simply go up and feast. Since its original introduction, the cane toad has had a particularly marked effect on Australian biodiversity. The population of a number of native predatory reptiles has declined, such as the varanid lizards, Varanus mertensi, V. michelli, and V. panoptes, the land snakes Pseudechus australis and Acanthopus antarcticus, and the crocodile species Crocodilus johnstoni. In contrast, the population of the agamid lizard Amphibolurus gilberti, known to be a prey item of V. panoptes, has increased. Meat ants, however, are able to kill cane toads. The cane toad has also been linked to decreases in northern quolls. In the southern region, of Kakadu National Park and even their local extinction. However, Japan wasn't the only place this strategy was tested though, which leads us to the Hawaii problem. Because mongooses are native only to Africa, Asia, and some parts of Europe, you shouldn't find any in a place like Hawaii. However, as of today, mongooses have established their habitats on the Big Island, Oahu, Maui, and Molokai. There have also been random sightings on Kauai, proving that the creatures are committed to making their presence known. The story of how they got there in the first place takes us back to the mid-1900s. You see, between the 1800s and the mid-1900s, Hawaii wasn't just a fancy vacation destination with pristine beaches and unbeatable scenery. There was something else that made Hawaii special: sugar cane. Unfortunately, as lucrative as this trade was, it also came with its own set of problems. The biggest of these problems was the rat invasion that threatened to wipe away the region's lifeline. Due to the sweet taste of the sugarcane stalks, rats began stalking and eating them, destroying a significant amount of these crops every year. Many options were explored in the search for a permanent solution to this rat problem. That was until 1872, when Big Island sugar planters stumbled upon an article about the new strange strategy Caribbean sugar growers just came up with to solve their rat infestation. As the story goes, these Caribbean growers, which we'll get into later in this video, imported mongoose from India to serve as a natural control agent. Because of the success recorded in this particular application, the Hawaiian growers also decided to test it out. 72 mongooses were brought in from Jamaica. Raised in a controlled environment, these new invaders were bred to one day wipe out the rat population. Their offspring were then shipped to plantations on other islands, from Maui to Molokai, even to Oahu. However, things didn't go exactly as planned. At first, not everyone on Big Island liked the idea of bringing in the mongoose. It wasn't because they didn't think the approach would work. Instead, they just wanted the people in charge to do more research and understand how to avoid making the situation even worse. Unfortunately, their warnings were not taken seriously. The mongooses were brought to Hawaii and released into the field to kill the rats. But there was only one problem. Rats are nocturnal animals, mongooses are not. So while the mongooses are only awake during the day, the rats come out at night. This means that the two don't really get to cross paths. Unfortunately, instead of taking out the rat population, the mongoose descended on Hawaii's native species. They started killing the birds, feeding on turtle eggs, and basically eating anything they could fit into their mouths. That wasn't the worst part though. With a favorable environment and enough food to go by, the mongoose population began to increase. It got so bad that nature sanctuaries and reserves had to put up special fencing to protect the endangered species housed there. While they may appear to be cute and cuddly, these mongooses are very aggressive and can even attack humans if their private space is not respected. The Hawaiians have been trying to get rid of them for years, but these guys don't get cleaned out that easily. You know who managed to clean out their mongoose population though? Jamaica. This story begins in the year 1872 with a British colonist named William Bancroft Espout. See, William owned a sugar plantation, and just like in Hawaii, he also had a problem with the rat population. To solve this problem, he decided to bring in a couple of mongooses. After all, what better way to wipe out a population than to bring in its biggest predator? But then again, very little research was done before they brought the mongoose in. This time around, instead of sticking within the territory of the sugar plantation, the mongoose population spread far and wide. They began hunting and eating the indigenous and naturalized birds and reptiles almost to the point of extinction. Things got even worse, as there weren't enough birds and small animals to feed on insects. This eventually led to a tick outbreak everywhere in Jamaica. Both humans and animals were getting infected, and it was all thanks to this invasive species. But then, toward the end of the 19th century, the story got muddled up. According to the British authorities, the cycle was later completed after the ticks began attacking the mongooses, eventually reducing their population to the minimum. This apparently justified their decision to not do anything about the mongoose problem, as they believed nature would balance itself out. However, that really wasn't the case. Unfortunately, though, the narrative was spread far and wide across Jamaica, so the colonists could get away with their disastrous environmental decision. But even though Jamaica is relatively free from this mongoose problem, the same cannot be said about the Caribbeans. A large population of Indian mongoose have been terrorizing the Caribbean islands for decades, and it doesn't seem like the problem is going anywhere anytime soon. This invasive carnivorous species has been preying on the biodiverse ecosystem. They've attacked the native mammals, fed on the birds, the amphibians, and even the reptiles. Their impact has been so devastating that more than a few animal species have been pushed to the brink of extinction. Just like in most places where they were introduced, the intention was noble. The idea was for these small Indian mongooses to control the rat and snake population in the cane fields. At first, this seemed to work quite well, as the mongoose began feeding on these unwanted species. However, the solution turned out to be too effective, as the mongoose began targeting and attacking the native species as well. One prey that's been picked on over and over is the hawksbill sea turtle. Before the mongoose came, these animals lived safely and securely on the Caribbean islands. But the mongoose saw them as easy prey and began hunting them down in large numbers. Today, they're critically endangered. The Caribbeans are especially suited for the survival of the mongooses. Imagine coastal areas, natural forests, grasslands, wetlands, and agricultural land. It's like a perfect symphony of the conditions the mongoose needs to thrive. Unfortunately, animals aren't the only ones threatened by these wild beasts, because mongoose are known carriers of rabies. Getting attacked by one can be a sure death sentence, as humans rarely survive rabid animal attacks. There's good news though. As of today, this invasive species has been successfully eradicated from the islands of Codrington Band Green Island off Antigua. Elsewhere in St. Lucia, locals are trying to come up with experimental removal traps. The idea is to use chicken as bait at an iguana nesting site, so when a mongoose falls into the trap, it can then be easily removed from the area. However, this strategy doesn't always work, because these mongooses waste no time repopulating depleted areas. But have you ever wondered why these mongoose find it so easy to invade islands in the Caribbeans and Hawaii? You see, far away in India, where these creatures are imported from, they live alongside about 60 other carnivores. However, things were quite different on the Caribbean islands. There they found an environment free of mammal predators. Due to the lack of competition, the mongoose were free to eat whatever they wanted, without fear of being eaten, all the while feeding on birds that nest on the ground, lizards, sea turtles, and a host of other important wildlife. However, a lot of people still believe the mongoose cannot receive the blame for the whole problem. Speaking of problems, the Caribbean episode pales in comparison to the situation on the Mijet Island. But before we go on with the rest of the video, here's our subscribers' pick for today. Decades ago, Japan brought snake killers to the island. 25 years later, everyone was shocked to find out that the rat population had remained the same. So why did the mongoose refuse to feast on the rat and snake population and instead focus on the endangered species? Why has every attempt to use mongooses as biological control agents, they've ended up damaging the environment? Is there really a way we can wipe them out once they take control? And most importantly, why are these rats climbing up a mountain in this bizarre image? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. Now let's get back to the video. Mongoose Island. It was back in 1910 when the Mongoose Island welcomed its first set of small Indian mongoose. The whole thing was the idea of the Austro-Hungarian Ministry of Agriculture. And just like the others, they were also trying to counter another invasive species. After keeping them in quarantine for a while, a total of 7 males and 4 females were released into the ecosystem. Their goal was to cut the population of the horned viper to the lowest level possible. Surprisingly, it worked. Within just 20 years of their introduction, the mongooses successfully brought down the population of the horned vipers. But then, things got a little crazy from here. With very few horned vipers to prey on, the mongooses started hunting the resident and migratory birds. When that wasn't enough, they moved on to domestic poultry, attacking and killing with reckless abandon. It didn't take long for the locals to realize that this was going to be a serious problem. To wipe out this invasive species, the people tried 2 approaches. 1, they offered bounties and rewards for anyone who could help kill these mongooses. 2, they brought in wild boars to hunt and feed on the mongoose, bringing down the population drastically. Unfortunately, though, none of these strategies worked out. The population continued to grow, and until today, no permanent solutions have been introduced to address this growing issue. If indeed the people of Mongoose Island want to kick these vermins out, here's how they can do it. The solution: the best way to keep a species in check is to achieve balance. That's a problem many nations and cities have been trying to solve for years. To keep an ecosystem stable and secure, there needs to be a balance in the population of prey and predator. So when a particularly destructive species starts growing at an alarming rate, it could easily upset this balance. As we've seen in many of these cases, endangered species suffer the most in these kinds of situations, especially when mongooses are introduced to a habitat where the animals don't really interact with predators. You see, when animals are kept in safe and secure environments where they don't have to protect themselves from being hunted by other animals, they don't tend to develop their fight or flight abilities. Because of this, they become easy prey to any predator, like the mongoose. Because of cases like these, many people believe that biological control methods don't work. However, that's not entirely true, especially in a place like Hawaii, where this strategy has helped save many species for decades. A good example is the panini cactus, which once choked the pasture land. Now its menace has been put to a halt by the introduction of 3 predatory insects and a plant fungus. Then there's the Erythrina gall wasp, which successfully wiped out the ornamental coral trees and threatened to send the native willy-wheelie into extinction. Now, with the help of a parasitoid wasp, it's been brought under control. However, species can't just be introduced without adequate research and preparations. It's not because mongoose don't eat rats. They actually do. The only problem is that they just don't stop there. You see, these beasts are opportunistic predators, so whenever they find themselves in a place where there's prey in abundance, they extend their influence very quickly. In addition, since most of their intended enemies are nocturnal, mongoose often miss their purpose, all while destroying the rest of the habitat without mercy. However, some have figured out how best to kick these creatures out when they start to step beyond their boundaries. Using traps, locals capture these mongooses in numbers and escort them straight out of their territory. Although this method can be tedious, it's proven to be the best method of wiping them out. In other cases, locals would bring in a natural enemy of the mongoose to help them in their fight against the invasive species. Sometimes it worked, other times it didn't. Luckily for Japan, though, they found a way to reduce the population to almost zero. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.